Welcome back to Embracing the Challenge with me, Gabriel Chan. This book is God's living word. In it, you'll find truths that can challenge the way you see God, yourself, and your community. And we're delving into its riches to see what authentic experiences with the Lord we can hope to enjoy in this life. Now, so far in this series, we've been exploring and talking through the issues related with love and grace and truth and holiness. Now we're going to turn our attention to a third foundational value in the kingdom of God, and that's service. From the moment that Jesus took up the towel and washed his disciples' feet in John 13, he showed us the way we as Christians are called to radically lead through humble service. Just as a side note, I don't know if you've ever had your feet washed, but it is the most anointed thing I've ever had done to me. Maybe you would want to consider it. But serving for many years was anathema in our Western capitalist societies. When earning money for the sake of it becomes a chief end of man, the idea of getting ripped off or giving something away for free or losing status or position through serving seems totally incongruous. And then when it comes to leadership, the approach became centered entirely around the individual trying to reach for the top of the pile. And this is so consistent with what many of us would see as a traditional view of leadership. Leadership being written about in hundreds and hundreds of books today. In the past, this standard view of leadership was a typical pyramid structure. Right at the top, there's only room for one. That would incentivize people, whatever their skill set or context or background, to seek after individual greatness. An individualistic approach to put I right at the top of the structures of power. And this was then expressed as a model of power versus influence. I use my status, I use my title, I use my position to control you or force you to do something that is my will, not necessarily yours. Everything about that entire model points to the idea of I. Now this model, many of us are familiar with it, many of us are rejecting it because though in the short term it might have results for the individual, it has no beneficial long-term results for the group or the community. There's a professor at Wharton, Adam Grant, who's written a book called Give and Take. And in his book, he explores the fact that as people use this model of trying to make themselves the best or the pinnacle, they find that these people have a successful short-term life and impact and influence. But over the long term, they find that there's an inability to maintain a strong network, to empower people to see them released into their potential. And the data that he looks at shows that the traditional model of leadership, or power for one individual, or the individual greatness model, so to speak, is in fact leading to poorer outcomes over the longer term. And Scripture has shown us all along that this would never be successful. Matthew 20, verse 26 through 28, Jesus has the same issue with his own disciples. They're wrestling and fighting amongst themselves. Who's going to be the greatest? And he says to them, it's not going to be this way among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your bondservant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And then in Matthew 23, verse 11, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Before we go on to explore the servant leadership model that Jesus calls us to, it is possible to read these passages from an unsurfaced worldview of individualism. Oh, if I'm going to be the greatest, what I'm going to do is outserve you and then I'm going to win. If you take that approach, the impact of your service is only going to be limited to a handful that would put up with the charade. I'll say it a bit more frankly than that. God can't use you if you're a follower of Jesus, but at the same time, you're trying to make yourself great, not God. Servant leadership is a total reframe. And I also want to push those verses that we've just read a little bit further. He tells us that for us to be great, we need to become a servant. For us to be the greatest, we need to be a bondservant, one who commits ourselves entirely to the things of God. But we still often also think about that as individual approaches. What if we recognize that Christ is actually calling for a culture, a people that would live as servant leaders? Not one person impacting 10 or 15 people, but a whole body of people, servant leaders, stepping out into the world, seeking to have an influence as they serve for the glory of God. Now, if you want to explore more about the idea of collaborative brilliance, you can look at the book Tribal Leadership by Dave Logan and John King, where they explore the powerful dynamic that happens when you start to embrace a culture that seeks to live out core values that really seek to advance the purpose of that particular organization. When we take that to the church, we think of servant leadership. In servant leadership, the pyramid is flipped. You're no longer the one at the top trying to gain the position of authority. You're the person at the bottom, the servant leader, the one who has made that move beyond seeking individual greatness to being someone that wants to facilitate and enable collective brilliance in the body of Christ. A servant leader chooses to focus their attention away from themselves to the needs of the people entrusted to their care, and this results in different behaviors and outcomes. Some of those behaviors are embracing a culture or a set of values such as we've been exploring: love, truth, and how we speak the truth in love, serving one another, and then actually modeling that servant leadership to the community and then on to the world. And the outcomes are also incredibly different. We see achievement for the whole organization. We see the opportunity to innovate together. There's a psychological safety when someone is seeking servant leadership. You're not thinking, hey, they're going to steal my ideas to make themselves even more of a name. You're thinking, wow, this person is committed to something I'm committed to. The greater good of this church, this organization, this body, particularly with the idea of glorifying God. The people in the community feel safer, and that leads to a greater good. I referenced Adam Grant earlier on. He looks at this idea of servant leadership, and he points out that people who have an agenda to give, to focus on the needs of others, produce better outcomes over the longer term. So this isn't just being seen by Christians, this is being recognized in the world of academia as well. You might say, Gabriel, you've got me sold, but how do I journey towards servanthood? This is about embracing personal practices on a daily basis. Matthew 20:28, as we read earlier, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Where are you serving in your life? What opportunities are you taking to do something for the betterment of somebody else without earning something yourself? You might say, Gabriel, there's nowhere that I can serve. There are always opportunities to serve. Open your eyes to the need. It might be someone next door who never has anyone visiting them, going and having a cup of tea. It might be the people that are trying to move house and got no friends to help them. It might be people that are wrestling with a career move that you could really help them in their development and preparation. It might be someone in your friendship group who is too proud to ask, but really needs someone to step out and help. Then it's saying, actually, you know what? Because I want to be a servant, I am never too big to do a small task. Jesus himself, the great king, is also a servant, taking up the towel to wash his disciples' feet. We're going to explore in our discussion with my brothers in just a few minutes' time what it is to model servant leadership in a worldly context, how we can invade the secular with the model of Jesus Christ. He calls us to be people that live a different culture everywhere we go, and there's no doubt that servant leadership can make an incredible difference in the world today. I'm joined here today by Paul, Henry, and James. Now lads, leadership is one of those buzzwords in the workplace. There's so many people concerned about what ways we can lead, how we can engage within communities, within workplaces, within business structures. And there's a lot of analysis that goes into us, the idea of a pyramid, the leader at the top having to control everything that goes on below. But we've talked a little bit about inverting that pyramid, becoming a servant leader, becoming someone that facilitates and enables other people. Now, we've got a bit of a mix of experience here. We've got a director in procurement, got a couple of actuaries, one a team leader. You guys surely have got exposure to having to take leadership responsibility at the workplace. How do you see servant leadership making a difference?
So I think the concept of servant leadership at work is probably countercultural to the whole idea around the workplace. You get a job, your ambitions are to ascend to the highest ranks, and the focus is on me and my individual pursuits of the top ranks. But taking the concept of servant leadership is about trying to enable your team and the people that you lead to be successful. And through that, getting a lot of satisfaction, a lot of growth and development as an individual and from a Christian standpoint. And to see those individuals to ascend to higher ranks, those people who've got a lot of ability and can make it to the top levels, and you enabling that is really, really powerful.
I just want to bolt on to what Paul's saying. So I totally agree that servant leadership is countercultural. And I think the normal model of leadership is somewhat zero-sum. Like, we're taught to believe that for me to succeed, you have to lose. And that sort of incentivizes certain behaviors where I need to put myself first ahead of everyone else. And that simply isn't true. And a lot about modeling servant leadership in the workplace is thinking about your whys, like, why are we doing this? And as followers of Jesus, we're called to be salt and light, and we're also called to love and to radically love. And it's not just radically loving in our communities, and outside of the work, but especially at work, because we spend a lot of our time there.
Yeah. And that's so true. I mean, we do spend a significant portion of our lives at work, and really seeking to bring Christ into the workplace is actually perhaps one of the most freeing experiences, in the sense of being able to live consistently with what we believe. So I agree with you there, Henry.
Yeah, and also I think, taking from what you said, Gabriel, and what Henry and Paul have said, I think it's very easy to try and use your titles. So I'm the qualified this person, or I've done this and that, or I'm the head of such and such, to try and inspire leadership among the people that are around you. But actually flipping that on its head and realizing, actually, I'm just here to empower other people. I'm not here to bandish any titles on them. I'm here to draw out the best in everyone around me, and that builds up the team. And I think that's a model that has been showed to us through the scriptures and by interaction with people around us.
I agree with you, and I think significantly, you're allowing the place for God to come through and actually look after you.
Yeah.
In that sacrificing of the me and the individual, you're giving place for Christ to exalt you and to give you the promotions and give you that focus and move forwards. I think one of the things that I learnt from my father, who's a minister, and seeing him operate in a church context around servant leadership, about sacrifice. I remember those phone calls, early in the morning to attend to somebody who was sick, or the phone calls to pray for somebody. It'd be easy for him to stay in bed, but the reality is that his focus was on the flock, and it was about the servant, leadership modeling Christ. And I think as we bring that back to the workplace, it's the same attitude. And through that, God is glorified, and he takes his place, as I said, and looks after us in that context.
And so practically, could you give us an example of perhaps someone that you've helped in the workplace with a particular servant leadership style, or perhaps your teams?
Yeah, I can give an example. So I think one of the things that I've been able to do through my career is to identify people's strengths and weaknesses and be very clear and honest about how I see that. And that empowers them to make decisions about their career. So somebody who worked for me a number of years ago wasn't very strong in my function, but she thought she had a lot of focus and a lot of career prospects in my function. But I had to counsel her that actually another function would be better for her. And that meant some difficult conversations. And she made the decision to leave the function, and after that was able to excel because I could see that there's some potential in another direction. And to me, that's about, it made an issue for me because I had to recruit new people. And there's some disruption around the resources that we had in our particular team, but longer term for her and for her success, it was the right call.
I have a pretty similar situation to Paul. So I've got a lad in my team, just about age 24 or so, and so he's quite young. And when I came into the position, he was like, his performance was really, really poor, and I was getting a lot of pressure from my boss and his boss just to basically try to put him on a performance plan. But that's sort of code for I want to manage that person out of the business. In terms of application of servant leadership, one of our core values in the workplace is to think about what this person's needs are. So it just resulted in a mentoring relationship where I'd sit down with him and I'd meet up with him on a regular basis. And then I found out he was going through a lot of issues outside of work. And so just over time, constantly mentoring and supporting, I built a relationship with him, and I think we were able to establish some kind of psychological safety with him. And then he started opening up, he started listening more, and he actually started to put more effort into his work. And so I think, just in summary, that I don't think servant leadership is playing Mr. Nice Guy. I think servant leadership is about standing on what your core values are, which is thinking about what are this person's needs, how do I get to those needs, how do I address those needs, and always try to balance them out with what's best for the team and what's best for this person.
And it's a big investment. Like you're saying, mentoring someone is a big commitment. You know, that's trying to fit in a half hour or an hour-long meeting in the middle of a day where you're running from meeting to meeting and client to client. And a schedule that's so full to put in another situation where you're trying to help someone, that requires a servant heart. It requires wanting really to see them move forward. It's not just ticking a management box, it's actually carrying a heart to see people's lives benefited and changed.
Yeah, and authenticity is huge, because if you're doing it and it's not authentic, it's very ineffective. And people see through that very quickly. And so modeling that and being consistent around it as well, I think is really, really important. So to Henry's point, if you are mentoring, then you need to follow that through and see the results from at the end of it. Don't give it halfway through. And the other thing I make is that leadership is always it's synonymous with power and kind of imposing rules and direction. And you learn a lot from taking a different approach from servant leadership and gaining more from that collective viewpoint. So in my team, for example, we have collective objectives, so nobody achieves as we all achieve. And that's the way in which we, from a culture perspective, kind of take the kind of me and I out of it a little bit to try and be more successful, so you can model that around the team as well.
I think just to back on to take a different approach to the whole servant leadership, the approach I've taken is just to look at how can I serve those above me, so my seniors. So in terms of what do they require if you're attending meetings, if you're going for clients, if you're going to meet clients, if something needs to go out. So what can I do to support them or to enhance them? And I think in taking that approach, then it's really expanded me as an individual, because I'm going to the workplace thinking, how can I support? How can I equip those who are on top of me? And I think they, like the authentic part you're talking about, Paul, they have then seen that and then taken me to their level as well, which is a very different way of approaching this servant leadership.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, because in one sense we're talking about serving people who might be junior to us, but actually also thinking about the way that we're serving our seniors, and that's a very important dynamic. Guys, where did you learn about servant leadership? I mean, what were your models? What were your examples? Who set you up to go on this path?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on that, like I say, I naturally had that approach from my father, and seeing him kind of, particularly in the church concept, leading the congregation, all the things that were involved in that and the sacrifices that were needed. I'll give reference to yourself as well. I mean, Gabriel, in terms of the leadership of us as a group of individuals who have important roles and have important things that we do in life, taking the time that you do to kind of invest in us, in the preparation that you do, and the interest you have in our development is also something that, again, I look to model.
The person who's had the greatest impact on me probably is my mom, so I probably identify her as one of the most powerful servant leaders in my life. In terms of where I learned how to execute core values, it'd be at church.
And that's true. I mean, I think for me, if I was to say anything, I think I'd learned from our senior minister, and we all go to KT and have Colin Dye as our leader.
Yeah.
But it's been humbling for me to, as I'm seeking to serve him, walking, say, following him into the church, and he's the one picking up rubbish. He's not giving orders to anyone else to go and sort things out. He's doing it himself and modeling it right from the get-go. And I think that culture is just pervaded right throughout the church in terms of how do we seek to live for Christ and serving in that kind of way.
Yeah, I think just to follow on from what the guys have shared, I've also learned it from my dad. So I think just watching him as a Christian, the way he's led the home and the way he's carried himself as a man, I think has had a huge impact on my life. And in the church as well, I've learned it from you, Gabe, and like you're saying, from Colin and from the guys around me as well. Just seeing how they carry themselves as men, what kind of example they set, I think has shaped the way I think about leadership and my approach to the world in general.
It's interesting, though. I think one of the things that, whilst we're talking about this subject, one of the things that challenges servant leadership is a level of consecration you might have at a particular point in time in your walk. So I find that whenever I'm not walking as close as I would be with Christ, then the focus on me becomes more strong, and have less of a focus on other people, because I'm always trying to maintain something as opposed to kind of walking that out. And you can see that kind of how it manifests itself in those particular times.
Can I ask you guys, what do you struggle with in regards to servant leadership? I mean, that's one element that you were just addressing there, Paul, but are there things that you find difficult?
I think the most thing difficult for me is to manage myself, because it's constantly having to manage the I, the ego, out of the narrative. Because once the I or the ego is involved, it's very easy to become emotionally compromised. It's very difficult to look at it. Yeah, it's very difficult to make decisions based on core values. And you know, I was speaking to a professor at one of the top business schools in Europe last year, and I asked him, I said, why isn't servant leadership, why isn't it practiced in mainstream management? And he said, there are two reasons. And one of them is that it's very difficult to find people who are able to manage themselves. And it sort of goes back to that point, where are you finding your source? What is feeding, who is feeding you so you can enable and feed others? And it just points back to the cross and Jesus Christ.
Brilliant.
I think I'd agree with Henry and also with Paul in terms of motives as well. So if I do something or if I serve in a particular way and there's no recognition, especially after a long, prolonged period of time. So it's very difficult to feel something. I just feel like I've been wronged, I've not been recognized for what I've been doing. And I think that comes down to the whole relationship with Christ. Because if I'm just serving so that I'm promoting me, and no one then recognizes me, then it becomes about me, and I could stop doing what I was doing previously. But if my relationship, like Paul just said, with Christ is ongoing, then it doesn't really matter whether I get the pat on the back or whether I get the feedback that is really outstanding, whether I get recognized in a meeting or anything like that.
I think that's a lovely point I'd like to end on there, James, is that we can really embrace servant leadership because at the end of the day, Jesus remembers, and he's the one that rewards us. Thanks so much, guys, for all that you shared here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Paul, James, and Henry have shared some of how they've tried to apply servant leadership in their lives, particularly in the workplace. And they're seeing varying degrees of success. This isn't something where it's going to happen overnight. But the workplace is somewhere where we as Christians spend so much of our time and are called to be influencers for the glory of God. Through the way that you look out for the needs of those around you, through the way that you think about the development of your peers and your colleagues, through the way that you look to serve in your family context or amongst your friendship community. God calls us to be a people that serve. But imagine what the church would look like as we embrace a collective brilliance in serving not just our immediate community, but the world for Christ. You can connect with us on our website or on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Rev Gabriel Chan. Next week, we'll be talking about desiring righteousness. Thanks for joining us here on Embracing the Challenge.